This is where we were. We were talking about margin last time. And when we were together last time, we were also talking about these margin questions. And we said, define margin in your life. And we were discussing, how did you get to define margin? We found the difference between what your capacity is and what you're actually doing. And if you're running at full capacity, full charge, running and gunning and blowing and going and all of those plotting and planning and ducking and diving and all of the other kinds of things that men do. If you're at red line the entire time, you have no movement, you see. And we saw that this is true in lots of areas. Areas where we need margin are physical margin. We need to have financial margin. What else would you need? What other kinds of margin do you think of? Relational margin, time margin, you see, spiritual margin, all those kinds of things. Having a little bit of room then for those things that matter, and identify areas in your life that don't have them, where you've just gone too far, and what steps you could take today. And we were looking at this. We were looking at this book, 5 Minutes of Margin as well, and or a minute of margin rather. And this is where he defined margin as a space, especially the space between our load and our limits. And what will guarantee sustainability and enhance vitality? You see, without margin, both rest and contemplation are but theoretical concepts, unaffordable and unrealistic. So the whole idea of if you need to have buffer, space, reserves in our day-to-day instead of unreasoned hurry. And so this is one of the themes that we've been looking at and seeing. And in the margin book then, jumping ahead, there's relentless power of discontent is one of the things I wanted to call your attention to. The idea of that for which I long becomes that to which I belong. And that's an intriguing concept to me. What if you realize that your aspirations, your desires are actually not for what God wants for you, but for what we think we want. And that becomes a comparative experience, you see. The relentless raising of the top line. And so the concept here is that without margin then we have a loss, a diminishment, a minimization of our vitality. So we need to have areas in our lives where we put that away. And I find one of the things I have to do is say no to more and more things. We talked about the game of musical chairs, didn't we, last week? And we talked about the fact that if you remember how that works with musical chairs, the music is playing and whoever's nearest to a chair will grab it, and people would try to cheat by hanging around a chair as long as they could before, then they'd leap to the other chair, so they'd always be by one. But as it were, you find that as the years go by, what does he do? He takes significant chairs out of your life, doesn't he? And it may be something that you clung to before and now you know you can't have it. And then he takes another one out of your life, and another. And then you have to choose, what are the things that matter most? And you're hoping that in a man's journey, it will not be the chair of position or power or prestige or possessions or popularity, but rather the chair of relationships, you see, and the chair of knowing God, and then the chair of knowing others, you see, and knowing yourself, those three chairs. To know who and whose you are, because you get to know the one who defines you. And so by allowing that to become something that strengthens and empowers you, you begin to realize that you are called to a level of inner poise and peace that's not very characteristic of the culture in which we're immersed. To the contrary, we see people are driven to perform and to achieve and to accomplish because they sadly define themselves not by who they are, but by what they do. And so the danger then is if you become a human doing because you're defining yourself based upon what you do. The world has a way of asking this question, what have you done for me lately? and it's never going to be enough. You have to constantly keep moving and moving to try to sustain something. But when we have the peace of knowing that actually God is the one who defines us, that He's the one who actually brings us hope and purpose and reality, so that when we come to know and love Him, then we're talking about relationships here, and with relational spirituality, this has everything to do is this whole concept, again, of being, knowing, and doing, which we've seen this chart many times, but I keep going back to it because it's so radically important. The concept of who you are is going to be defined by who you love. See, you're going to be shaped by what you love will define you. The heart will always make room for what it treasures, always. So that you can, that's why I've said before, with love and fear, tell me what a man loves, and I'll tell you what he fears. Tell me what he fears, I'll tell you what he loves. Because what do you fear most, you see? Is it the loss of intimacy with God, for example? And so there was a question that you have, because if He is, in fact, the wellspring of all being, of all things, then He's the one who defines you, and that brings us to the issue of identity. So the concept then is my identity is based upon the world or the Word. And if it's based upon the world, you will be defined by what you do. And you're right back on the old rat race, you see. The problem is, even if you win the rat race, you're still a rat. So the problem, it just doesn't get you anywhere. The people just go on, they're in a mad, reckless journey as they speed and hurtle toward oblivion without really asking the question of the three basic questions you've got to ask: who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? Where I came from is the living God. Who am I? It's the one who made you, defines you. And if you allow Him to define you, then you discover that you have then a basis, a power, a foundation for loving other people in a compassionate way, because you know who you are. And you don't have to anything to prove. Because again, what you do is not what defines you. Who you are defines you. So you're defined by that, and that liberates you and releases you from the excessive push in this world, so you can be a human being, not a human doing. And then, in doing so, then you can love others compassionately. So there's a real power to understanding what that looks like in your life. It's a very important motif, an important theme for us to keep in mind. So one of the things that this book, Margin, talks about, and again, it's I found Richard Swenson's books on these to be very helpful, and is that for which I long becomes that to which I belong. And so this whole idea is a comparative. So the concept that we've seen before and again is comparison's the enemy of contentment, you see. So you've got to really say, what is it the Lord wants from me? So how do you gain contentment? Because if you're not content with what you have, you won't be content with what you want. So therefore you have to ask, what do I do? Can I choose the way of being content, and rather than always raising the level of expectation in this world, which is, in my opinion, a great mistake that we can often make. It's something that we have a diminishment. And effectively, what you see is the whole idea of the prosperity ladder, most of us looking up the ladder. And what he's saying is we need to override the set point by spiritual maturity to look down rather than up the ladder, to fix our contentment on godliness rather than relativism. And it helps immeasurably if we're surrounded by a community of like-minded friends rather than a society where envy has been normalized. And that's an important principle. There's a normalization of envy, and people are so accustomed to that. That's why they're restless, they're isolated, they're lonely, and they're just ambitious to accomplish something that will never satisfy.
The envy is turned into entitlement, and entitlement is marketing.
Yeah, the marketing of entitlement.
We're flooded with the messages that you're entitled to. Get it now.
Yes, yes, I can definitely see that. It's just a huge theme, that entitlement. And of course, the question is of entitlement is the more you have, the more you expect. So this morning I was saying, where's my coffee? My coffee came late. Now Jake's got his coffee, but I'm not complaining though.
Dennis, get on the ball.
He's got his coffee, but I'm up here and I can't just keep slugging it back here, so I just have to wait, I guess.
I have a real problem with the word contentment.
Tell me what your problem with
My
contentment
problem is I don't think I should be content. I think I should constantly be striving in order to define who I am and why am I here and what defines me in order to be bold in Him.
Yes. Sometimes what we do is we conflate contentment with basically compromise or complacency. And it's not the same. To be content doesn't mean you're complacent. So that if we see biblical contentment, that you're content because God has defined what you have and put you where you need to be, even though it's not what you necessarily want. He's given you what you need. Remember, a lot of it has to do with this issue that I struggle with God all the time of what my best interests look like. I almost never agree with Him, you see, on that point. And so, therefore, if I choose to say that He's given me what He knows I need, then and be content in this moment, then I can walk with a sense of peace and poise in this world. But it doesn't mean, though, that I'm not energized and desirous of greater good and greater accomplishment in terms of serving the King and being a good steward and showing and making a good report before the living God. So, if anything, then, if my desire is to be pleasing to Him, the work I do should be with a greater excellence, not less. So contentment is not the same as complacency, but rather it is to believe that God has put you where you are and what you need, even though it's not what you want. And then but that doesn't mean that you just become passive and placid. So does that make sense to you, though, that contentment, properly seen, just like, for example, peace, or gratitude. Gratitude doesn't mean, again, that you are not going to perceive or pursue things that you believe are needful, but it means that you're grateful with what you've been given. And it's a choice, it's an aspect, it's an attitude that you have to choose, that you come out of this inner stillness and silence, this inner life of Christ in you, the hope of glory, and letting Him define me. The more I do that, the more I realize that I have to continue to submit my idea of what's best for me to His idea of what's best for me. Yes?
What part does ambition play?
Ambition, again, I make it my ambition to be pleasing to Him. Paul is an ambitious man. It's just he's ambitious for the right reasons. You see, we are wired by God to pursue profit, to pursue gain. We were never wired to just be losers, you see. He wants us to pursue profit. Just don't define profit the way other people in this world define profit. Don't pursue something that will let you down in the end. That's what he says. So there's no appeal to self-denial or taking up your cross and denying yourself. None of those appeals are claiming that that's not going to lead to a greater profit. He says, in fact, by doing those things, that the last becomes first, you see. And we begin to realize the pathway of downward mobility is to realize again that when we serve, we actually are going to be people who lead, and that the last is first, and all the upside down values of the kingdom of God. So in my thinking then, realizing that gratitude and contentment are choices and states of mind that are based upon whether I truly believe that God has my best interests at heart. At the end of the day, it keeps coming back to that. I'll be honest with you, and I've told you this really more than once, that my tendency is to jump ahead and run ahead of what God wants. Sometimes I have a pretty clear idea of what I think it should be. Sometimes it turns out to be true, but it never happens in my time frame, almost never. And if it did, it wouldn't be good for me, as it turns out. So every day I have to remember the kairos chronos deal. I have to constantly submit my chronos, my plans, my calendar, to his kairos, his invitations, and his agenda. But it means I have to die to my agenda and receive his. But it doesn't mean I'm complacent. He's actually calling me to a greater good. So there's a profit. There's nothing that he appeals to that will not lead to a greater good in the end. He just says, don't define your good, your view of good, by how the world defines it, which I fear is the case with most people who are churchgoers, are that they still more or less put a kind of a spiritual veneer or perhaps compartmentalize and put a little part over here that Christianity has, but it doesn't have to raid and invade the rest of their life, you see. So there's a kind of living by two sets of rules mindset. Then you have a divided heart. And so if you're half-hearted, you're double-minded. See, then you're in two minds. And so to give him a whole heart means on a daily basis, you have to choose the way of gratitude and contentment by believing that God has where you need to be right now and when you need to be there. And he's going to hold you there. And a verse that keeps coming to my mind, because it's my medicine, as it were, is rest in the Lord. So for me to do that then, in quietness and rest is your salvation, you see, in repentance and rest. Yes, Stuart.
And I was thinking, I remember many years ago, I really appreciated the question our brother here, the difference between.
It's a good question.
But I remember hearing one brother sharing on Philippians 3 where Paul says, I have learned to be content.
Yes.
And I think, to abound in the faith, I think when things are going well, we feel content. When our life is out of control and we feel we've lost the control, then we're frustrated and angry. So how do you, that Paul said, he knew enough that he had been in shipwrecks, he had been in, life didn't go the way he wanted all the time, but he had learned to be content. And I think that's the struggle.
And it is, and it's a secret. It's a very real secret, isn't it, for us to have this? Because he does say that I rejoice now that you've revived your concern. Not that I speak from want, for I've learned to be, as Stuart is saying, content in whatever circumstance I am. Then he says, I know how to get along with humble means. I also know how to live in prosperity. In any and every circumstance, I've learned this secret, and it is a secret, of being filled and going hungry, having abundance and suffering. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. And so there's a secret to contentment, and there's a choice that one makes. And not being anxious, as he will say earlier in this chapter, but rather for us to be a people who pursue those things that are excellent and so forth. So, So this
The secret, verse 13.
13, the secret of contentment. Yeah, all things through him who strengthens me. In other words, he's claiming that God has really defined him, and this is why he can experience the peace of God, you see, because he knows the God of peace, you see. And so he says the peace of God, verse 7, which surpasses all comprehension, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. And then you'll notice here at the end of verse 9, and the God of peace will be with you. And that's quite intentional. So the peace of God then is a development. So when you choose then to be anxious for nothing, but you'll notice he doesn't say you're passive, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. So you make your requests to God, and then he can give you this peace. But then he says as well that it's critical that you focus your mind not on the world, but on the Word, so that you will have a matrix, a context in which you can manifest that kind of contentment. So this is why we have to be whatever true, right, and honorable, and so forth. This is just not the way we are normally wired to be, and it's just it becomes quite evident in that. So these are themes that you can see, and he therefore Swenson talks about physical rest. You see, when we're not productive, we feel guilty. But there are times when you need to realize that there's greater productivity in times of being with God than there may be in times of doing in this world, you see. There's a very reality that the whole idea, again, if we've said before that intimacy energizes activity, then really we can then realize our desire is to be pleasing to Him. That's an ambition, and it's a legitimate desire. But if you're not seeking to be pleasing to Him, you will be seeking to please and impress people. And that will be a real, in my mind, a snare in your life. So even the idea of physical rest and so forth, that if we don't want to so idealize productivity that we become just human doings again. And so restless work and that sort of a theme. So he talks about physical rest. He talks about emotional rest because the nature of anxiety, depression, our worry and so forth, and it just diminishes our capacity. And so there's need for really quieting of inward activity sometimes. Remember, I've told you this image before. Without Shabbat, Sabbath, rest, peace, normalizing things, putting things together in their proper place, there will be no shalom. You see, so without Shabbat, without rest, there'll be real no. Without Sabbath, without intimacy, but then the peace disappears. I think a lot of that has to do with that. So making time to do this is going to be appearing. Let me be honest with you. Bible study, praying, is not productive time. Have you ever thought of it that way? It's not productive time as the world defines it. You could be doing something. You could be putting a deal together, or you could be writing something, or you could be looking at something. You see my point there? That is at least quantifiable and measurable, so we're driven to the visible every time. And that is why inner rest and inner life with Christ and shalom and making spaces and having Sabbath, whether that's a weekly larger Sabbath or a mini Sabbath, you can have a mini Sabbath at a red light. Depends, most people don't, but it's an invitation. You're going to be there anyway. So the point is that we're just constantly trying to accomplish and achieve. And as a result, we have no inner rest. And that's the lack of margin that he's talking about here, that we need to have. So this is why I think about this image of take my yoke upon you and learn from me, you see. And then you will find, what does he say? You'll find rest for your souls. So God knows we need rest. And that's what defines us. The interior, the invisible, defines the exterior and the visible. And it's really hard for us to treasure that which is not now over that which is here. Going back to the musical chairs for a minute, I think one of the ways I'm now beginning to try to amplify my aspiration for heaven, because most people don't want to go home. They want to stay more years in the land of the dying rather than go to the land of the living. Let's face it, this is the land of the dying. If this is home, we're in serious trouble, you see. And again, we look around and it's not that we're looking better every year and so forth. So let's be honest about that. Again, the idea that this is a part of the plan to show you you're not meant to be on this planet for long. You're here to be formed into what God is preparing for you, for your true home. And so if a person's not homesick and world weary, something's wrong. So how do I enhance my desire, my appetite for heaven when most people don't have it? How do I want what he wants for me? And again, this comes from this interior life that we're talking about, this inner rest, for me to have this perspective. But as I reflect upon this, there are so many things that I now know that I'll never be able to do on this earth, that I really would enjoy doing and could do perhaps very well. Have you ever thought about it in that way? Have you thought about leveraging that thing that you'd love to be able to do if you had enough time, to be a hint of home, and there you'll do it in a way that time won't be your enemy, it'll be your agent. And it will not be something that takes your life away, but something that you now use, space and time. Your experience will be different in a resurrected body, in a resurrected existence that is so beyond what we can imagine. But at least I now start thinking about that, because there are things I'd love to do And I think about some of those activities I'd love to do, and I imagine myself doing that, and I will do that. You see does that make sense to you then? It gives me something concrete. So think about, what would you know that you could do, but you will never have time in this world to do? Every book I read is another one I can't read. Every decision, every choice I make is another thing I can't do. So there's always, then it's something, there's a diminishment, and then your sphere diminishes along with that. And so you have to make the choice. Isn't that designed to transfer our affections from what's seen to what's going to endure? So if, again, we go back to this idea of identity, who am I? And then secondly, the identity, the question of why am I here? Which is your purpose. What purpose are you here for? Are you here to make money? Are you here to make a name for yourself? Why are you here? And you're here, if the scriptures are true, to become conformed to the image of his Son in preparation in your soul for your eternal home in the Father's house. Where am I going? So that's the question of hope. What is my hope in? So if I put my hope in those things that God promises, then it's going to make all the difference in the world. So he talks about emotional rest as well and spiritual rest. And these are all important things. And dealing with those matters is very critical. So around your tables then, when we kind of look at these little questions that we had before to find margin in your life. So let's go back to that and do that a little bit more on that. Again, I want you to think of what do you long to be able to do, but this time I would like you to think about things. Maybe one thing would be to add another component, and it would be the concept of what do you know that you will never be able to do that you'd like to do in heaven. So activities. So the whole thing here is then developing an appetite. You see, developing an appetite for home. For what lasts. For what is lasting is what defines us. So what are we giving up? We're giving up, effectively, we're exchanging our material goods, our time, talent, and treasure for his eternal promises, that those will be done away with, but you can continue, though, to build into people because they're eternal beings, and relationships matter. And how will that affect me? And how will I then be able to accomplish the things I want? And it'll be in ecclesial sense too. We'll be doing it in many contexts collectively, wonderful things together. And the conversations of heaven. Start thinking about that too. Try to get more specific about that and imagine what that might be like. Imagine this group, for example, just the group that's in this room right now. Imagine if we were to meet in 1,000 years. It's an interesting thing. Why don't we make an appointment? Now think about what that might mean, to making an appointment. This very group will remember. The fun part is you'll remember. You'll remember this moment, you see. And then we could actually make it happen, pull it off. How is that going to be? I don't know. But he has things in store for us that we can't even begin to imagine. We can only see through a glass darkly, don't we? Yes?
How do you make an appointment 1,000 years in the future in a place that has no calendar? It's all now.
Yeah, although you will still be in time. That's the interesting thing. It's just that your experience of time and of space will be different. Because only God's outside of time and space. So there is some kind of I don't know what I'm even talking about. I've got an appointment to meet with this guy on the cosmic wave. I don't even know what we're talking about here. But you get it. What you don't know, but you're aspiring to something. That's the funny part. It's not timelessness. It's all now, but yet it's not. There's another sense in which you're accomplishing things, and you are in time, but time is no longer an enemy, it's your friend. It's doxological. Your experience of space is not going to be limiting. I have a feeling, I don't know if I'm right, but I think I am, that you can choose to be at a place and you're there. Now you start thinking about that for a moment. I'm also rather hoping that I'll be able to change my magnitude and go zooming in and out and going, what do you think the new creation will be like? Beneath the Sea. It's a little homework for you. It's on, I believe it's on Amazon Prime. It's called Beneath the Sea. See this thing. It's about a 1-hour thing. And it's ravishing the wonders that God has made. Just look at that, and just see it with your bride. I'm telling you, it's ravishing. It's that rich. See it with a friend. Because when you begin to see what kind of a being is it who can make that? What can he make? You haven't seen anything yet. You see, that's the wonderful thought. So we'll spend a little time around this. One of the questions that surfaced in our Zoom group was again the question of politics, and people are constantly wringing their hands over what's going on and what's wrong with the world. And indeed, one of the things I was going to call your attention to at the end of Margin, his book, and this, I don't know, when was it written? Let me see, it was, this thing came out. The reason why you want to see that is because it's relevant here to this. I don't think I shows the 1992? Thank you. That's a long time ago. And it becomes obvious by looking at these charts at the end of the book, because they are intriguing here. Many of them are exponential. Now, information, you can be pretty confident. So you can even see where the curve is. It's in the 90s. And that thing has gone way beyond that chart now, because information, just that on that level alone, knowledge, its combination is going up so rapidly there that it doubles faster and faster. So the rate itself is accelerating. So the last 5 years has led to more growth in information than in all of human history combined. You see, the last 5 years. And the 5 years before that was not as much as the last 5 years, but it still was significant. You see where I'm going, where for a long time it was almost flatline. And then the same would be true with complexity. You think about the person's complexity, and that's why we remember about the agrarian culture, and at least they're people, there's the transgenerational dynamic that's going on, and wisdom's being conveyed and communicated, whereas now then it becomes industrial. And now we've gone from an agrarian to an industrial now to an information society, where people are coming now where they're no longer connecting much at all. And people are often getting so digitized that they're not really in the analog world anymore. So these radical changes, change itself is an interesting way of looking at how change itself is changing. And our gross natural product, but this was what's most amusing here, the gross federal debt. See, you see, and you notice up until 1940, you see, you have this pretty flat. And then it's just an astonishment. If you saw this, you'd say, "Oh, could it possibly get worse? Could it possibly get worse than this?" You see, yeah, it could, because what in fact it's done then is it's gotten so bad that it's beyond belief. So when you go up here, higher and higher. Higher and higher. Now where is it? Well, if I were to draw it on this map, on this line here, it's gone up. The paper's not big enough on that scale. The paper's not big enough. What's happened? What are we pushing 30 trillion? By the way, they're not counting debts and Social Security and that realm as well. They're not counting those things as well, and that's going to be, so if you count all those debts, you're talking about 100 trillion or something. So bankruptcies, bank closings, gosh, that's interesting, isn't it, how things have changed. But you see, just the new books published, that's kind of, well, now it's gone off the charts because of the digital realm as well. So we live in a very challenging world indeed, so many things. But when you look at all of these figures, travel, life expectancy, but interesting, Christianity as a percent of world population is still going up. In fact, that's a good one. I finally have a good one, because you got to end with a positive, you see. And this is one of the things that becomes a theme to me. although the world is worse in many ways than ever before, and there's more persecution by far than the church has ever experienced in its history. And it was very bad during the Diocletian persecutions, the Decian and so forth. But I'm telling you, what's happening now in the world is beyond imagination in places like India and Middle East and Africa, and all these oppressive contexts of warfare against this. And the warfare itself is increasing. And the forces of good and evil are becoming more and more evident. And there's less and less gray, you see. It's becoming one or the other. And it's Christianity is always the target. So, yet at the same time, I don't wring my hands because God's in control. And more people are coming to faith now than ever before. It's even in the Middle East, as many of you know about these Islamic nations where so many Muslims, maybe 25% of them have reported these dreams about someone, about this book that they're going to hear someone talking about and so forth, and God uses this with people. So I look at all those things and realize, that God's in control. And frankly, things have lasted longer than I anticipated they would last. And I look ahead, what do you suppose the next 5 years will bring? If you just compare right now what's on television, the media, what's become normalized, and it's not pretty, and compare that kind of thing 5 years ago. So there are programs now that are popular that really are so far down the line that would have been outrageous 5 years ago. What do you suppose 5 years, if the Lord tarries, will be like? It boggles my imagination. Yet God is in control, and He knows the optimal time for the coming of His Son. And His Son will come, and then the play is over. You see, because when the author enters the play, it's over. And the one who's the Lord of Lords, the King of Kings, the ruler of all the nations, the one who holds all things in His hand, when He comes, then all things shall be well. And it is an amazing thought when we consider that it will be, though, first of all, a king coming with righteousness, and there will be judgment. The first time He came, it was not to judge the world, but that the world might be saved. But He will, as messianic prophecies concerning what we now know to be the second advent, not the suffering servant, but the reigning king. Who would have guessed it to be the same one, you see, in the Old Testament? But the fact is, He will come, and He will judge the nations, and so He will be the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and all things then will in fact be brought under His control and His authority. And then with that demise then, and Satan is bound, and then I go to this and recognize that at the end of the day, in chapter 21, then it says, "Behold, the tabernacle of God is among men, and He will dwell among them, and they shall be His people, and God Himself will be among them, and He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will no longer be any death, no longer any mourning, or crying or pain. The first things have passed away. Behold, He's making all things new."